Thank you for the opportunity to share some thoughts on the early years of operations research in South Africa until 1974, 50 years ago. I will make reference to awards and honors that befell some of the individuals in later years. I hope that you'll find connections from your own experience with some of the individuals, organizations, and events that I discuss. My name is Gerhard Geldenhuys. I was a member of the Department of Applied Mathematics at the University of Stellenbosch for 38 years, from 1960 in 1998. I had the privilege of being part of those early years of operations research. Okay. I enrolled for a degree in applied mathematics at the University of Stellenbosch in 1956 and received my degree in 1958. The 3-year course in applied mathematics in that time consisted entirely of a mixture of engineering and classical mechanics. I did my honors degree in pure mathematics in 1959. One of my fellow students, Gerhard Geldenhuys, received his BSc degree in 1957 and had worked at Rembrandt in 1958, and therefore had some experience of industrial applications in mathematics. Operations research by Churchman, Ackhoff, and Arnoff had been published 2 years previously and had just appeared on the shelves of the university library. They contained really exciting case studies on operations and research in fields far away from the mechanics that I had studied for my BSc degree. This book was not part of our pure mathematics course, but we decided to read and discuss chapters from this book on our own. The chapters on inventory models, allocation models, waiting time models, replacement models, and competitive models. We discussed these chapters and the case studies in the book with great interest, thinking of what the possibilities of such applications in South Africa. For the major part of his later career, Gerhard Geldenhuys was professor of computer science in Germany. He was an expert on parallel computing and joint organizer of several international conferences in this field. Gerhard Geldenhuys was also a cousin of the father of Marty Harmse, the head of our special interest group on the history of our. I started my teaching career in 1960 with a second-year course in applied mathematics, still only mechanics. When I had the opportunity in 1961 to teach a third-year course in applied mathematics, I immediately introduced a section on operations research with an application in agriculture. This was our department's history, that there was a deviation from the mechanics course, the contents of the course. After my MSc, which I obtained in 1961, I took a sabbatical and studied at Harvard for 1 year, once again in applied mathematics, which included courses in linear programming and game theory. A subscribed member of the Operations Research Society of America and purchased all the published volumes of their journal, Operations Research. This proved to be invaluable when I returned to South Africa. Of Operational Research Societies, with the acronym IFORS, was founded in 1959. While at Harvard, I learned to my surprise that there was one attendee from South Africa, and in fact the only one from Africa, namely Dr. Tusinius of the Council of Scientific and Industrial Research, the CSIR, in Pretoria. He was the head of its division for industrial economics. Later in his career, he was professor of business management and administration at the University of Stellenbosch. In this time at Harvard, I also learned that OR was being done in South Africa by Dr. Herbert Sichel. CSIR in Pretoria, the National Research Institute for Mathematical Sciences, with the acronym NRIMS, was established in 1961 with Dr. Oliver Burger as its director, a position which he held until 1973. Dr. Burger was known internationally for his work in meteorology. In my talk, I shall often use the acronym NRIMS to refer to the National Research Institute for Mathematical Sciences. On my return to South Africa, Dr. Burger recruited me namely to conduct a survey of possible applications of OR in South Africa and to present a series of lectures on OR for the staff of NRIMS. I used the remaining part of my sabbatical from November 1962 until March 1963 to complete these two projects. My lecture notes were published as an internal NRIMS report. Attended by Dr. Burger himself and by staff members such as Dr. Kastrowski, Dr. Gerhard Rudolph, Dr. Nico Laubscher, and Gideon de Kok, as well as a bursary holder of the CSIR, Jos Grobelaar, at that time an MSc student at the University of the Orange Free State, doing vacation work at NRIMS. For several members of these staff, this was their first exposure to and training in some of the techniques of OR. My lectures covered linear programming, game theory, infinite games, queuing theory, and dynamic programming. Computer scientists might be interested to know that I used Kenneth and Iverson's sophisticated programming language, APL, as an acronym for a programming language to describe the linear programming algorithms. My second task was to compile a survey of possible areas where OR could be applied in South Africa. This comprehensive survey included some areas in which OR was already applied, especially in mining, but for the most part, it pointed to possible applications that, as far as I knew at that time, had never been attempted in South Africa. I had my own set of the operations research journals that I had brought from the United States of America, and the CSIR had an excellent library where I could consult a variety of research journals related to operations research. I mentioned a number of chapters in the report. Planning, this, for example, included various critical path methods. Industry and commerce, there were applications such as replacement and repair, advertising and sales, petroleum refining and blending, and waste control. Under agriculture, forestry, and related industries, there were applications such as crop selection, dairy management, optimal meat feed mixtures, and lumber sorting. Under local authorities, hospitals, postal services, and railways, there were applications in traffic analysis, school timetables, and scheduling outpatient facilities. In the military sphere, there were applications such as wargaming, aircraft allocation, search, reconnaissance, and pursuit. NRIMS in the early years of OR in South Africa and the positive effect of the support that the director, Dr. Oliver Berger, provided for OR can hardly be overestimated. On the basis of my report on the possible applications of OR, Dr. Berger, with the support of Nico Laubscher, Gerhard Rudolph, and Kostrowski, decided to establish OR as a discipline within NRIMS and to appoint staff who work in this field. Later, a separate division for operations research and statistics was established within NRIMS. While filing my report on possible applications, I was pleasantly surprised to note the extent to which OR was already being used in South Africa. For example, pioneering work in this regard was done by Dr. Dani Krieger and Dr. Herbert Sishaw. Dr. Operational Research Bureau in 1952, a consulting company which for nearly 20 years applied OR in a wide range of fields, including health hazards in mining, sampling and ore evaluation in underground mining, maintenance in industry. Dr. Sishaw may truly be called the father of OR of Africa. Transportation, an early success story of OR in this field relates to the Patco bus company in Johannesburg. OR was used to minimize the number of accidents on Patco bus routes. The South African Railways was another organization which during this period saw the advantages of OR with regard to routing, the right number of tracks on a given route, and general forward planning. In the military, since at least the 1950s, the South African Defence Force also had an operational research team, which was largely concerned with equipment and problems of strategy and tactics. ISCOR also applied OR since the 50s, mainly in the operation of its open half furnaces and steel mills. Members of NRIMS who were involved with OR gradually moved to other organizations, mainly universities. Kostrowski was appointed at the University of Cape Town as a senior lecturer in statistics within the Department of Mathematics, and in 1968 as its first professor of statistics. He immediately gave attention to techniques of OR in their courses, initially by making use of my NRIMS lecture notes. Gerhard Rudolph was appointed as a senior lecturer in the Department of Statistics at the University of South Africa in 1967, where he was responsible for OR. He took the initiative to introduce the first formal degree course in OR at South African University in 1968 at postgraduate level at UNISA. Already in 1968, there was an astounding number of 68 students who enrolled for the course. Rudolph was appointed a professor of statistics at the University of Rhodes in 1969. Louis Reeve, the deputy postmaster general in that time, had been Secretary of Defense shortly before and knew of the applications of OR during the Second World War. In the course of 1969, he recruited Professor Rudolph to form an OR group in the Department of Posts and Telegraphs. Rudolph took up this task in 1970. The loss of the services of Gerhard Rudolph at UNISA was compensated by the appointment of 2 new lecturers, both with NRIMS experience. The first was Jos Grobbelaar, major role continuing and strengthening the offering of OR at UNISA. He obtained his PhD in 1974 and was appointed as professor at UNISA in the same year. Second lecturer with NRIM's experience, appointed at UNISA, also in 1969, was Gideon de Kok. He had been a lecturer in mathematics at Stellenbosch University before that, and later was a professor of computer science at the University of the North and at the University. Accepted a position with ISCOR, where he could apply techniques of OR in the steel industry. Nico Loubser was a professor of statistics, initially at the University of Port Elizabeth, later at the University of Stellenbosch. When I returned to Stellenbosch in 1963, after my sabbatical at NRIMS, I introduced a section on linear programming in the third year BEc course in applied mathematics, and later also in the first year. I also introduced OR in postgraduate courses in applied mathematics. While Gideon de Kok was a lecturer in mathematics at the University of Stellenbosch, he and I became involved in an interesting application of linear programming in planning on a local poultry farm. The manager of the farm had been a colonel in the Royal Air Force during the Second World War. An experience of the advantages that could be obtained by operations research. The farm had to deliver 100,000 day-old chicks per week to their customers. There were 45,000 hens on the farm. Mortality rates, various seasonal phenomena, culling procedures had to be balanced to obtain a constant supply throughout the year at minimal cost. In regular consultation with the colonel, we devised a linear programming model for the problem, which eventually consisted of approximately 160 variables and 50 constraints. The University of Stellenbosch had an IBM 1620 computer, which was a baby mainframe computer from the IBM stables. For our final run, we reserved the computer for the evening and went there with a stack of punched cards containing the data for the problem. The technical printer. As the computer began its run, we watched in fascination as it printed out every few minutes the value of the objective function at the current vertex of the simplex. After several hours, we obtained the optimal solution to a very complex problem, which we could present to the colonel for implementation. 1963 until 1969, I supervised 5 MEC theses in applied mathematics on topics in operations research, in search theory, critical path scheduling, traffic flow problems, game theory, and finally, quadratic programming by Henny de Kok in 1968. Henny de Kok initially lectured at the University of the Western Cape, but joined the Department of Applied Mathematics in 1980. He was the joint winner with Marius Sinclair of the Tom Rodos Medal in 1991. When I look back at my involvement with operations research in South Africa, I realized that I can speak mainly from an academic background and from a Stellenbosch perspective. The available textbooks in mechanics and in operations research were all in English. Complete typewritten lecture notes in Afrikaans were provided for all pre-graduate courses and for most postgraduate courses, both in the traditional applied mathematics and in operations research. This in itself was a huge and time-consuming task. For most of the 1960s, we only had 3 members of staff, and at postgraduate level, we also had to cater in research for numerical methods, differential equations, automata theory, elasticity theory, and fluid mechanics. The heavy teaching duties and the writing of Afrikaans lecture notes left very little time for formal research. It took many years to improve the size of the lecturing staff and to develop an atmosphere favorable for research. During my teaching career, the Department of Applied Mathematics at Stellenbosch was unique in South Africa, in the sense that it was located within the Faculty of Engineering, not in the Faculty of Science. Science students could take courses in applied mathematics and receive degrees in the Faculty of Science, but our main teaching load was with engineering students. For close cooperation with our colleagues in the departments of civil, electrical, mechanical, and chemical engineering, and especially later on, opportunities to do research in collaboration with them. To operations research, in particular in the field of industrial engineering. I was requested by the Dean of the faculty to introduce operations research in the final year industrial engineering course, which I did in 1966. The staff situation in the Department of Applied Mathematics improved steadily from 1970 onwards, with the appointment of Philip Fourie in 1972 and Marius Sinclair in 1974, the operations research offering could be expanded significantly. Later on, Philip Fourie was the first ORSSA president, for the 2000-2001 term. Another important development in the 1960s was that the number of young operations researchers returned from studies overseas where they had training in OR at distinguished universities in South Africa. Then, with Dave Masterson in the banking sector, Henny Venter of the University of Potchefstroom, Dewald Rode of the Atomic Energy Board, as well as Gerhard Rudolph, Jos Grobaar, and Lou Kotze from the interims. Significant development in the 1960s was the formation of informal OR groups. By 1968, a statistics and operations research group was already active at the University of Cape Town. In 1968, Professor George Hadley of the United States of America visited South Africa. In that time, he was recognized internationally for his excellent textbooks on linear programming, nonlinear and dynamic programming, and inventory control. I particularly remember the lectures on those topics that he presented for the Cape Town group and how inspiring that was for me. Late 1960s, there was also a Johannesburg operations research group with Tom Rosodowski as its chairman and Dave Masterson as its treasurer. They had regular meetings and they even had special interest groups in cybernetics with Mike Roberts, programming with Tom Rosodowski, metrics with John Jocelyn, and in forecasting with John Ryder. In 1968, a meeting of individuals interested in OR was held in Johannesburg as a result of initiatives taken by Dave Masterson, Jonathan Miller, and others, and with the support of Dr. Herbert Sichel. Attendance of this multidisciplinary meeting was in excess of 180. The guest was Professor Pat Rivett of the United Kingdom, an excellent speaker, and at that time, one of the best-known operations researchers in the world. Out of this meeting, a National Co-ordinating Committee was formed, which would be recognizing the possible establishment of an operations research society in South Africa. Members of the National Coordinating Committee included Dr. Herbert Sichel as chairman, Dr. Gerhard Rudolph of UNISA, and Mrs. Peter Piro and John Joston worked very hard and contacted individuals throughout the country to obtain as large representation as possible at the founding meeting. Eventually, it was decided that the conference would be held by the end of November 1969 at the University of the Witwatersrand. Several impressions of that founding conference stand out in my memory. There was the wise leadership of Dr. Sichel, who was deservedly elected as the first president of ORSSA. The authority with which Tom Brozowski made his contributions impressed me. I enjoyed the active participation and involvement of Jos Grobler in the proceedings. Miss Virginia Martin was a well-known and highly regarded South African computer expert in those years. Her attendance of and participation in the conference added further prestige to the proceedings. I was impressed by the high standard of the papers presented at the conference and the complete applications which were discussed. There was an excellent blend of work from the industrial, commercial, and the academic spheres. I particularly remember a fascinating talk by Mix Klein, a later president of ORSSA, who used the steepest descent method to savings in the running of copper mines at Kitwe, Chingola, and Chililabombwe in Zambia, and by Jim Botry, who used linear programming to obtain a reduction of 20% costs of curbing river pollution at AECI's plants at Modderfontein. There's a buzz in a large hall where we chiseled out the initial constitution under the wise leadership of Professor Sichel. The conference fees, which also covered copies of the papers and lunches, were R3.50 per person. Thinking back on that conference, I can say that it remained an inspiration for me during my entire teaching career. Operations Research Society of South Africa, with the acronym ORSSA, was founded on Thursday, 20 November 1969. Two excerpts from the finally adopted constitution are as follows. The name of the society shall be the Operations Research Society of South Africa. The society shall be to promote a wider knowledge of the techniques, theory, and practice of operations research. The following executive committee was elected in terms of the constitution. Dr. Herbert Sichel as president, Jos Grobler as vice president, John Joslin as secretary, Dave Masterson as treasurer, Mike King as editor of the ORSSA newsletter, and another four members of the NRIMS team as additional members, namely Professor Gerhard Geldenhuys and Professor Kostrowski. The new society was privileged to get an excellent management team under the leadership of Dr. Sichel. In 1973, Dr. Sichel was awarded the gold medal of the South African Institute of Mining and Metallurgy for his research in the field of mining. I shall next discuss the first branches of ORSSA that were established in the early 1970s. The research group of the 1960s went over seamlessly into the first chapter of ORSSA. The following officer bearers for the Johannesburg chapter were elected early in 1970. Dave Masterson as chairman, Jim Buckley as vice chairman, Dr. Umberto Ricardo as secretary, and Mike Roberts as treasurer. Dave Master became the ORSSA president for the 1972 term. I was in Johannesburg area in 1970 on a sabbatical, working towards my PhD at the Rand Afrikaans University. I was a member of the Johannesburg chapter in that year. A talk by Jonathan Miller on his attendance overseas of the 1970 TIMS OR conference in London. TIMS is the acronym for the Institute for Management Sciences. Jonathan reported on the interesting topics that were discussed at the conference, including hospital services in the United Kingdom, a parcel post distribution system for the United Kingdom, and computer-assisted forecasting systems. Jonathan Miller moved to Caltex in Cape Town in the early 1970s and was the president of ORSSA in 1974, with me collaborating with him as national secretary. I also remember informal discussions that I could have with the members at meetings of the Gerhard van der Veer on operations research at the South African Railways. He later became head of South African Airways, at which a clearly distraught Dr. Sichel the tragic death of Tom Rosodowski, his wife and children, because of a gas leakage in a hotel where they stayed overnight while they were in the United States of America. New chapter Pretoria was founded in 1970 with the following office bearers: Dr. Dewald Rode as chairman, Rolf van der Heever as vice chairman, and two former members of the NRIMS team, annual conference of ORSSA was held in November 1970 at ISCOR in Pretoria. Lou Kotze of NRIMS had by that time moved to ISCOR and was a contact that enabled us to have the conference at the imposing new headquarters of ISCOR. The team was elected as the new president. I remember particularly a talk by Gerhard Geldenhuys on optimal mail sorting policy, and by Dewald Rode and Louis Robenheimer of the Atomic Energy Board on plant location and long-term planning. 1970 conference, it was also announced that in memory of him, an annual Tom Rosodowski Medal would be made available for a paper of outstanding merit delivered by a member of ORSSA. This coveted and prestigious medal of ORSSA was first awarded in 1971 to Dr. Gerhard Geldenhuys for his excellent paper at the 1970 conference, on optimal male sorting policy. Gerhard Geldenhuys was also the ORSSA president for the 1973 terms. Western Cape chapter was founded in 1972 with the following office bearers: Volker Rademacher of Caltex as chairman, Hendrik du Plessis of Sanlam as vice chairman, myself as secretary, and John Lawton of Mobil Oil as treasurer. Hendrik du Plessis was the ORSSA president for the 1976 term, and John Lawton was the winner of the Tom Roski Medal in 1983. The period from 1971 until 1974, I also supervised 2 more students for their MSc degrees in applied mathematics on topics in operations research: Stefanus Loubser on OR in insurance, and Marius Sinclair on duality in convex programming. Marius Sinclair was the winner in 1986 of the Tom Roski Medal and the joint winner of the medal with Henny de Kock in 1991. In 1994, he emigrated to Canada, where he pursued a successful career as a research consultant. By 1974, OR courses were presented at several universities. I only mention the following: UNISA OR degrees were instituted from 1968. At Stellenbosch, where former OR degrees Cape Town University with Kostrowski, Wits with Herbert Sichel and Paul Fatty, Potchefstroom with Henny Venter and Giel Harting, and Rand Afrikaans with Martin Venter. I would like now to mention 2 early full members of ORSSA who made significant contributions to OR in South Africa. Tim was a founding member of ORSSA. He really impressed and inspired me with his excellent research in mathematical programming. Through my friendship with him, I also came to know the strong OR team from the University of Potchefstroom in later years. Paul Fatty started his teaching career at Wits, then had a very successful term in RIMS at the CSIR from 1981 until 1980. He returned to Wits, where he made a huge contribution for OR. He was awarded the Tom Roski Medal in 1981 and was also won the prestigious Good Eve Medal of the British Operational Research Society in 1984. President for the 1984 term. The original members of staff at NRIMS had moved to other universities and organizations by the end of 1969. In the early 1970s, new staff members responsible for OR were appointed at NRIMS. I have already referred to the role of Paul Fatty in later years. I shall now mention 3 of the new staff members from the early 1970s. Stewart led the renewal of OR at NRIMS, where he worked from 1971 until 1983, and followed this with a very successful career at UC. President of ORSSA for the 1978 terms. He was recognized internationally for his research in the field of multi-criteria decision-making. Made enormous contribution to OR in South Africa, and we will always be remembered for that. Man is an active member of ORSSA, has had a very successful career at NRIMS and at the CSIR, and has been a major force with regard to outreaches with OR in Africa. He was a joint winner of the Philip Medal in 1978 and 1985, and was the ORSSA president for 2 terms, first in 1987 and again for the 2002-2003 term. High Force Fellow Award, which was made to him in 2020. Thijs de Vries worked at Ingrams from 1974 until 1978. He then moved to Arms Corps, where he made significant contributions to OR in the military field. He was president for the 1986 term. I was a member of the Ingrams Advisory Board for the 1977-1979 term, and could observe close range the positive impact of these new appointments on the OR scene in South Africa and at Ingrams. This concludes my discussion of the role of Ingrams in those early years of OR in our country. In closing, I pay tribute to 4 ORSSA members from the very early years as fellows of our society in 2005. Theo Stewart, Giel Hatting, Paul Fatty. Grateful for the wonderful contributions that they made to operations research in South Africa. They have made us proud. I have discussed my experiences of OR until approximately 1974, 50 years ago. For the opportunity to share these memories with you.